All right, so give me a second here. All right, so one down, two more to go. This takes us now to the political portion of the podcast, where we will examine Plato's Republic. Yeah, I'm not sure how long I'm going to be studying Plato's Republic, but we'll see how far I can get today, and then uh, maybe I'll announce it before the next episode how far I'm going to be going. Um, so this first politics podcast will look at um, the first book to midway through the second book when Socrates starts speaking again. Um, okay, and again, this is Plato's Republic we're studying. Um, First, let's start with a little bit of a history lesson. We already mentioned Parmenides, his student Zeno, Heraclitus, and Aristotle in the philosophy portion of this podcast, and it is now time to introduce two more to our cast of characters, Socrates and his student Plato. Let's put everything in context here by examining their relative position in history. Historians divide philosophers in ancient Greece into two categories, Pre-Socratics, meaning before Socrates, and the Socratics. Of these six, Parmenides, Zeno, and Heraclitus are all pre-Socratics, while Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are all Socratics. Parmenides, Zeno, and Heraclitus were all born in the 6th century BC, or right after it, while Socrates himself was born in 470 BC and lived to 399 BC. From there, his student Plato lived from circa 425 BC to 347 BC, and Plato's student Aristotle lived from 384 to 322 BC. Um, yeah, so we can see that the Socratics came after the Pre-Socratics, um, and were no doubt influenced by their work. And it's also interesting to note that Plato is the link between Socrates and Aristotle, and there's a really nice chain of thinking that goes in with that. Okay, so yeah, as I just mentioned, Plato was a student of Socrates, which is important because Plato's Republic is written in the form of a dialogue between Socrates and some young men. It's a sort of question and answer back and forth known as the Socratic Method. Um, and in the Republic, this method is used both as a way to refute untrue ideas, such as its use against Thrasymachus in the first chapter, or as a way to develop them as when he asks leading questions to his students to develop his views. By leading questions, I don't mean like, you're in a court of law and you ask the question, when was the last time you beat your wife, where it's presupposed that that you did um, uh, beat up your wife. But um, sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought here. Um, yeah, so it's not like though that kind of leading question where it's presupposing an answer to another question. It's more like, he's asking questions that are directly related to each other in the hope of leading the conversation somewhere productive. Although I will say I mean there are some like actually leading questions that he asks, but I would say for the most part, most of them are not leading questions in the legal sense. Um, all right. Oh, excuse me. Having introduced the history, it is now time to introduce the book itself. Plato's Republic is one of Plato's best known works and concerns the rightful ordering of society as well as that of the individual. This rightful ordering of society and of the individual is what Plato considers to be the virtue of justice. So, in effect, Plato's Republic is the search for justice and what it entails in both the society and the individual. Well, without further ado, let's right into chapter 1. Um, okay, here we go. Republic starts off with Socrates being accosted by a group of men at the end of the festival with the request that he come to their house. Socrates acquiesces and there talks to an old man who argues that it is the manner of one's living that determines whether old age is a burden rather than old age itself. This conversation naturally changes to virtue, with Socrates asking the old man what justice is. The old man says that justice is the giving of what is owed, but can't stay to maintain his argument further, so another man, Polemarchus, jumps in for him. After a lengthy back and forth between them, Polemarchus is forced to change his definition of justice to those actions which benefit friends who are good and harm enemies who are bad. This definition, however, is discarded when Socrates claims that it is not just to harm anyone, and giving everyone their due would require harming one's enemies. Before moving on, it is interesting to point out here that this ethic of not harming enemies, which was itself a major departure from the ethics of the time, was expanded on even further by Jesus Christ in Matthew 5:44, where he says, "Love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them that persecute and calumniate you." Again, Matthew 5:44. In the main here, this is actually a rather amazing definition coming from someone living 350 plus years before Christ. The one thing that was a little unclear, however, at least to me, is whether Polemarchus's definition of justice was supposed to also apply to God and the state as well. If so, remember his definition of justice is giving good to friends and giving good to good friends and harming bad enemies. Okay. All right. So if he meant this argument to also extend to the state, this argument that I just mentioned, to the state and God, well, I'm not so sure that that holds water. Socrates takes down Polemarchus's definition by saying it is wrong to harm the bad, and which is a noble ethic for the individual, and I would totally agree with that on the individual level. But if applied to the state and God, there might be some iffy consequences from that. Basically, if God can't harm and here I know we're presupposing that God exists, but you can substitute the state in for this as well. If God or the state can't give evil men the penalties they deserve, then there would be no way to hold these evil men to account. And it would be true what was said in Isaiah 59:15, that truth has been forgotten, and he that departed from evil lay open to be a prey. And the Lord saw, and it appeared evil in his eyes, because there was no judgment. So justice in the Polemarchus's definition of justice is actually a great one for the individual, but not necessarily a good one for the state and God. Additionally, now this might seem like kind of a random side note, but this is really important because Plato sees the state and the individual as reflections of each other. There's a point where he says, like, if you're trying to see letters on a stone from far away and you can't see them, it's better to have a big stone with bigger letters and look at that one first, so you can get an idea of what the smaller one says. So the smaller one being the individual, justice in the individual, and the bigger one being justice in the state. Well, this is a very interesting view. I don't know that it, and this idea that justice for the individual involves restraining from harming people, but justice on a state level or for God doesn't, would include harming people or giving them what they deserve. It's kind of incompatible. And it also splits the justice for the individual from justice to the state, and kind of might compromise Plato's argument that starting with the state would give us light to understanding the individual. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So if we apply this to the state, it would be absurd to suggest that the just state is one where evil men are allowed to do whatever they want without being harmed. But this is the conclusion of Socrates' argument at the level of the state. So it's perfect. So there's either two things going on here. Socrates either didn't intend to have his refutation refer to the state or to God, in which case what is just must be different between the state and the individual, which would call into question Plato's later arguments about the individual and the state alike. Remember the small rock and the big rock with letters? Or he did intend to have this definition of justice refer to the state and God, in which case evil men would overrun the earth without penalty. This might seem like much ado about nothing, but the definition of justice is literally what the entire book is about, and it seems premature, to me at least, to discard this plausible definition in the cases of the state and God. Okay. Be that as it may, however, and returning to the topic at hand, a newcomer emerges named Thrasymachus, who claims that justice is the subjection of the weak to the strong, i.e., might makes right. Pretty much a Machiavellian kind of view. Locke also, the Leviathan, thinking about that. Life in a state of nature is nasty, short, nasty, brutish, and short. Wait. Life in a state of nature is nasty, brutish, and short, or something like that. But yeah, so this definition kind of like inverts the whole thing and puts injustice as the virtue and justice as the vice. And this is what Socrates' questioning eventually leads to, is as Thrasymachus is trying to maintain this definition, it turns out that he's forced to admit that justice for the individual, he's forced to admit that injustice is the virtue and justice the vice, and he makes this argument from like what people believe or what people say or about the state, in terms of like honor and stuff like that. He argues that people want to be in the state. They want to have power, and the having of power allows them to dominate everyone else. And it is only the state which forces people to do the right thing that keeps that from happening. So let me see here. Yeah. But Socrates argues after this that let's see. I'm trying to remember here. If Thrasymachus is true, if it's true what Thrasymachus is saying, that the power is only to be sought for itself, this would contradict the what we understand about the different crafts and different like academic disciplines or like different or like actual crafts, like like tapestry making, or like whatever it is out there, and being a shepherd. And so Socrates uses this example of the shepherd to show that he doesn't rule over the sheep to dominate them. He rules over the sheep to take care of them. That's what good husbandry means. And in all other cases in the arts, we can see that the craft is aiming for the good of the thing for which it is modifying. And then applying that also to the state, Socrates argues that the state, as sort of the shepherd of the people, is also concerned with the benefit of the people rather than the domination of that Thrasymachus is suggesting would happen, and which is in line with more Machiavellian and Lockean. No, sorry, it wasn't Locke. Sorry, it was Hobbes. Wow, sorry, Hobbes' view of the state of nature, like without laws. So Thrasymachus, he retires after getting soundly beaten. But then in the beginning of book 2, we think we're off the hook, like this argument is now dead. Polemarchus and his brother both take up this argument and really to really push it to the extreme in terms of what uh, what Thrasymachus could have argued. Um, so they say, all right, let's imagine that. Uh, actually, they point to a story about how someone found a ring, and after accidentally putting it on his finger, he realized that he was invisible to everyone else. And they put the question to Socrates, like, he can do literally anything while he's invisible. Um, like, he can have as much food as he wants. He can like have sex with whoever he wants. He can kill the king and go in power. Whatever he wants basically. And then Polemarchus and his brother, I think Admetus, say, like, what person would refrain from doing those things if given the opportunity. Um, and then they also go on to pose to Socrates another dilemma, of the just man versus the unjust man. So they argue, okay, unjust man. Let's have an unjust man who gets everything that on earth that you could want: power, money, fame, whatever, uh, and through unjust means. And his unjustness is not injustice is never figured out. So he also gets the benefits of honor and good opinion from um, his people. And then let's contrast that with the just man who has everything taken away from him and has to live like out in the streets or whatever, uh, because he doesn't want to use those same means. Polemarchus and Admetus argue, what man would choose the just man over the unjust in that case, or uh, like um, yeah. So what man would choose the just over the unjust in that case, and how can you call the just man happy in that case? Um, and they pose to Socrates this question, and then they kind of let it be. They make it very clear they don't actually believe it, but they need an explanation for it. Um, because they weren't satisfied because Thrasymachus' objections didn't carry the argument far enough. Um, all right, that is about all midway through the second book. So Thrasymachus, or sorry, no, Polemarchus and his brother stop um, stop talking, and then the next week we'll be looking at uh, Socrates' response to them, and in the second half of the second book, and probably further on as well, through perhaps the third and fourth books. Um, yeah, I think that's all for politics. So yeah, thank you, and we'll uh, we'll turn it over to the economics section of the podcast.